Turn the car around, now. The words burst out of me so suddenly that my husband nearly jerked the wheel off the highway. We were driving somewhere in upstate New York, maybe an hour shy of the Canadian border, when every nerve in my body told me something was horribly wrong. "Ruth, what is it?" my husband asked, already easing over to the shoulder while cars roared past us. My hands were trembling as my eyes locked on the overnight bag sitting innocently in the back seat. Just minutes earlier, my son Brandon had called. His tone had been strangely tender as he asked me about that very bag. And then, before hanging up, he'd said, "I love you." In 42 years, my boy had spoken those words to me only a handful of times, never casually, and certainly not in the middle of an ordinary phone call. "Something's wrong," I whispered, my chest pounding. "We have to turn around right now." My husband gave me the same look of trust he'd shown me throughout 50 years of marriage. He didn't question me, didn't argue. He just waited for a break in the traffic, swung the car across the lanes, and made a U-turn that very likely saved both our lives. Because what I later found in that bag shattered everything I thought I knew about my son, about the family I had been supporting for years, what they had plotted, what they were willing to risk in order to fix their money problems, was so devastating that even now, months later, I struggle to believe my own child could have put me in such danger. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand how I ended up screaming for my husband to turn the car around before crossing into another country, I need to take you back 5 years. 5 years of sacrifice, of generosity, of love that my son's family came to take for granted. Because for half a decade, I had been their safety net. I had kept them afloat. And in the end, they repaid that kindness with a plan so shocking, so criminal, that it nearly destroyed me. My name is Ruth Henderson. I am 68 years old, living with my husband of 50 years in our cozy 3-bedroom home in Albany, New York. We raised 3 children in this house. After decades of working as a school secretary, I retired with a modest pension and the savings we had carefully built up. Life was steady and comfortable until 5 years ago, when everything changed for my son Brandon's family. Brandon had been a warehouse supervisor for nearly 15 years when his company downsized. Just like that, at 42 years old, he was suddenly out of work, with a wife, Amber, and their 3-year-old son depending on him. The job market was brutal. Even when Brandon did find work, it was temporary jobs that paid far less than what he'd earned before. As his mother, how could I just sit by and watch my son's family struggle? It started small, just a couple hundred here and there for groceries when things got tight. Sometimes a little gas money so Brandon could keep looking for work. Then their landlord raised the rent, and they couldn't make up the difference. What was I supposed to do? Let my grandson be evicted? Before I knew it, I was covering most of their major bills every month. The rent, the car payments, the insurance, the utilities. I was even paying for groceries and covering daycare so Amber could work part-time at a nail salon. "Mom, I promise this is just temporary," Brandon would tell me whenever I handed him another check. "As soon as I'm back on my feet, I'll pay you back every penny." Amber would nod along, though I noticed she never seemed as thankful as Brandon. Sometimes I caught her rolling her eyes when she thought I wasn't looking, or making little comments about how some people had it easier than others. I pushed those feelings aside, because family helps family, right? And I adored spending time with my grandson. I was babysitting him nearly every weekend, taking him to the park, reading him stories, spoiling him the way grandmothers do. Those moments made every sacrifice feel worth it. My husband worried at times that we were giving too much. "Ruth, honey, we need to think about our own retirement," he would remind me gently. But I couldn't stand the thought of my grandson going without. Besides, we were getting by fine on our pension and Social Security. The years began to blur together like that. Brandon would land a job, then lose it, then pick up another that didn't pay enough. And I kept writing checks, filling the gaps, holding their lives together. By the time my grandson started school, I realized I had been supporting them for nearly 5 years straight. Not just here and there, not just in emergencies, but month after month, year after year. They never had to worry about making ends meet because Grandma Ruth was always there. I thought I was being a loving mother and grandmother. I thought I was helping them through a rough season until they could stand on their own again. What I didn't see was that somewhere along the way, my generosity stopped feeling like a gift to them. It had become an expectation. They planned their lives around it, saw my money as theirs. And when I finally, for the first time in 5 years, said no to one of their requests, I learned exactly how much they truly valued me beyond my checkbook. Last January, everything shifted with a single phone call. My grandson was enrolled in the local public elementary school, and from what I could see, he was doing well. He was bright, cheerful, and always excited to talk about his friends and school projects. But Amber called me one afternoon and painted a very different picture. "Ruth, he's being bullied constantly," she said with heavy concern in her voice. "These kids are so cruel, making fun of his clothes, excluding him from everything. The teachers don't care, and the classes are overcrowded. He comes home in tears almost every day." My heart clenched. What grandmother wouldn't ache hearing that her grandson was suffering? "There's a wonderful private academy across town," Brandon chimed in. "Small classes, strong anti-bullying policies, personal attention for every student. It would solve all his problems." "That sounds perfect," I said, already picturing my grandson thriving in a safer environment. "What do you need me to do?" Amber's voice softened. "Well, the tuition is steep. It's about $15,000 for the rest of this school year, and $18,000 annually after that." My stomach dropped. That was far more than anything they had ever asked of me before. But then I thought of my grandson's sweet face, and I nearly said yes on the spot. Almost. "Let me think about it," I heard myself say. "That's a lot more than we usually help with." The silence on the line was thick. I could almost feel their disappointment radiating through the phone. "Mom," Brandon said slowly, "this is about your grandson's happiness and future. Surely that's worth any cost." For 3 days, I wrestled with the decision. My husband and I went over it again and again, checking our budget, our retirement plans, our own security. The truth was, we could afford it, but it would require major changes to our lifestyle. Still, something gnawed at me. Every time I babysat my grandson, he seemed perfectly content. He talked happily about his friends, his school projects, never once mentioned being bullied. When I asked him gently about school, he just shrugged and said it was fine before running off to play. Finally, I called Brandon and Amber back. "I've thought carefully," I told them. "I love that boy more than anything, but I think we should try other options first. Maybe meet with his teachers, look into the school's anti-bullying programs, or even consider a different public school before rushing into private tuition." The silence that followed was icy. So you're saying no? Amber asked flatly. I'm saying let's try other solutions first before committing to such a big expense, I replied calmly. Unbelievable, I heard her mutter, clearly wanting me to hear. Some grandmother. The call ended soon after, with vague promises to look into alternatives. I knew they had no intention of considering. Within a week, everything shifted. Suddenly, my usual weekend babysitting visits were cancelled. We're busy this weekend became the standard excuse whenever I asked about seeing my grandson. Family dinners at their house, once a monthly tradition, stopped without explanation. When I called to chat with my grandson, the conversations were brief and awkward. He's doing homework, or he's busy with friends became Amber's constant responses. The hardest blow came at the grocery store one afternoon. My grandson spotted me, ran over, and wrapped his little arms around my waist with the biggest smile. But Amber quickly called him back sharply, barely acknowledging me. I saw the confusion in his eyes. He didn't understand why Grandma wasn't welcome anymore. For the first time in decades of helping, I had set one boundary, asked for one pause. And this was their response. The message was clear. To them, my value was only financial. The grandmother who paid their bills, babysat their child, and carried their burdens was being punished for daring to say, "Let's think about this," instead of immediately opening her checkbook. 2 months passed like that. 2 months of being shut out, of aching to see my grandson, of wondering if I had made a terrible mistake. I even began questioning myself, wondering if I should have just paid the tuition to keep the peace. That was when they called with a sudden change of heart and an invitation that would lead us to that highway in upstate New York. Looking back now, I can see those 2 months of silence weren't punishment. They were preparation, and the trip they offered was the trap. It was early April when my phone rang. Brandon's voice was cheerful, almost too cheerful. "Hey Mom, how are you and Dad doing?" he asked with forced enthusiasm. After weeks of barely speaking to us, the shift was jarring. "We're fine, dear," I answered cautiously. "How's everyone there?" "Great. Actually, that's why I'm calling. Amber and I realized we've been way too stressed lately. We thought it would be good for all of us to get away together. Spend some quality time as a family." My heart lifted. Despite everything, I had missed them all terribly, especially my grandson. Amber's cousin has a beautiful cabin up in Quebec, right on a lake. She invited us all to come for a long weekend. You, Dad, me, Amber, and the boy. What do you think? The thought of a trip together, of being reunited, was exactly what I'd been hoping for. Maybe, I thought, they had finally realized that family mattered more than money. "That sounds wonderful," I said. "When were you thinking?" "This weekend, actually. I know it's short notice, but Amber's cousin just had a cancellation, and the weather's supposed to be perfect. It would be such a great chance for our boy to see his grandparents." We made plans for them to ride with us. Our SUV had enough space for everyone, and they mentioned bringing fishing gear and games for my grandson. "Oh, and Mom," Brandon added at the end of the call, "would you mind carrying one extra bag for us? Our car's packed with the kids' stuff and all the fishing gear. It's just a small overnight bag." "Of course, sweetheart," I said without hesitation. What grandmother wouldn't carry an extra bag? The night before the trip, Amber dropped it off. A plain black, overnight bag, nothing unusual about it. She was unusually pleasant, chatting about how excited my grandson was and thanking us for helping with the ride. He's been talking all week about seeing you, she said with a smile that seemed genuine. This trip is going to be so good for all of us. I went to bed that night feeling hopeful for the first time in months. The next morning, we decided to take two cars since there was so much luggage and gear. My husband and I packed the SUV with the overnight bag and supplies, while Brandon drove their car with Amber, and my grandson following close behind. The drive started out wonderfully. My grandson waved at us from their car, and we'd pull alongside at stoplights so he could show us his snacks and games. It almost felt like old times, like we were a family again. After about 3 hours on the road, my phone rang. It was Brandon calling from their car behind us. "Mom, quick question," he said, his tone oddly strained. "Yeah, honey, that bag Amber gave you. You've got it with you, right? It made it into the car." "Yes, of course. It's right here next to me." "Good, good. And you haven't. I mean, you didn't need to move anything around in it, did you?" His question struck me as strange. Why would I have gone through their bag? "No, sweetheart, I haven't touched it." "Why? Oh, no reason. Just making sure everything's secure for the border crossing. You know how careful they are these days." He paused, then said something that froze my blood. "I love you, Mom. You know that, right? I really, really love you." In all his adult life, my son had never called me just to say those words. And never with that desperate edge in his voice. I hung up, but my hands were shaking. Every instinct I had built over nearly 70 years was screaming at me. That was when I turned to my husband and said the words that saved us. "Turn the car around. Now." We pulled off at the next exit. While my husband kept everyone distracted, I quietly unzipped that ordinary-looking overnight bag. What I saw inside made my blood run cold. Tucked beneath my grandson's folded pajamas and some of his favorite toys were small plastic-wrapped packages. Even at my age, I knew exactly what I was staring at. Drugs, a substantial amount of them. My own son and his wife had planned to use me, his 68-year-old mother, as a drug mule across an international border. They counted on my love for my grandson, my longing to reconnect, and my unquestioning trust to carry their illegal cargo without suspicion. If I had crossed that border, I would have been the one facing charges. At my age, I could have been looking at years in prison, and that phone call from Brandon wasn't just checking on the bag. It was a farewell of sorts. He knew what he was doing to me. He knew he was about to throw his own mother's life into ruins to cover his mess. That was the moment everything clicked. The sudden cold treatment after I said no about the tuition, the quick reconciliation, the urgent timeline, the cousin's cabin. It had all been carefully arranged, every step designed to manipulate me into doing the unthinkable. I stared at those packages and realized my own child was willing to sacrifice me my freedom, my future, my name just to escape his debts. Something in me shifted permanently. The Ruth who had excused her son's choices for half a decade was gone. The grandmother who sacrificed her own well-being for the sake of peace vanished in that moment of terrible clarity. My husband came over quietly. "What did you find, Ruth?" he asked. I showed him the contents without a word. His face drained of color, then hardened with an anger I had rarely seen in 50 years of marriage. "We're going home," he said firmly, from their car behind us. I could see Brandon waving, looking anxious, probably wondering why we had stopped. My phone started buzzing with his number again, but I turned it off. I couldn't bear to hear his voice, not after seeing what he had done. The ride back to Albany was silent, but inside my head, the pieces kept falling into place. The distance they created after I said no wasn't punishment. It was part of their plan. They had wanted me desperate for reconciliation so I wouldn't ask questions. They had played on my love for my grandson and my blind trust in them to nearly destroy my life. When we finally pulled into their driveway, Brandon and Amber were already outside, confusion and panic written all over their faces. "Mom, what's going on?" Brandon called. "Why did we turn around?" We were almost there. I set the bag down on their doorstep and looked at my son. Really looked at him. When had he become someone I no longer recognized? When had his struggles twisted him into a man who could gamble away his mother's freedom? "I know what's in the bag," I said quietly. The color drained from their faces. Amber clutched Brandon's arm, her eyes wide. "Mom, I can explain," Brandon started. "No," I cut him off. "There's nothing to explain. You planned to use me to commit a federal crime. You were willing to let me face prison just to solve your financial mess." "It wasn't like that," Amber blurted. "We were desperate. We owed money, and people were threatening us. We thought if we could just make one trip. You thought you could sacrifice me instead of facing your own choices." I finished for her. Behind them, my grandson stood in the doorway, looking lost and frightened. My heart ached for him, caught in the wreckage of his parents' decisions. I steadied my voice. "Listen carefully. I will no longer provide a dime of financial help. No rent, no car payments, no groceries, nothing." "Mom, you can't mean that," Brandon pleaded, his voice breaking. "We depend on you. We can't survive without your support." "Then you'll have to figure it out," I replied, the same way millions of other adults manage to survive without putting their mothers at risk for prison. He grabbed my arm. "Please, just think about this. If you cut us off now, we'll lose everything. The house, the cars, all of it." I pulled my arm free and looked him in the eye. "You were willing to let me lose everything, my freedom, my reputation, my future. Now you'll live with the consequences of your own decisions." We drove away, leaving them standing on the driveway with that bag between them. For the first time, they realized the safety net was gone for good. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a notepad. I wrote down every automatic payment, every monthly check, every bill I had been covering for Brandon and Amber. The total stunned me. For years, I had essentially been funding their entire lifestyle. It had been so long since I looked at our finances without those expenses that I hardly remembered what our own budget truly looked like. Within a week, I had shut it all down. The emergency bank account they could access, the credit card I had given them for groceries, the automatic payments I had set up for their insurance. All of it was canceled. And I took another step that same night. I called a lawyer. I explained everything what I had discovered in the bag, the plan they had tried to pull, the risk they put me in. He was horrified, and he helped me document every detail in case they ever tried to drag me down with them. For the first time in decades, I put my safety above my son's convenience. It should have felt selfish, but instead, it felt like the most responsible thing I had ever done. Because the truth was, I hadn't really been helping them all those years. By covering every shortfall, by rescuing them from every consequence, I had kept them from growing up. I had stopped them from learning how to live within their means, how to solve their own problems, and now, finally, they would have no choice but to face reality. 4 weeks after I cut them off, the fallout began. My phone rang constantly. At first, it was Brandon, then Amber, sometimes even my grandson's number, used to guilt me into picking up. I let every call go to voicemail. The messages started angry. "Mom, our cards are being declined everywhere. You can't just abandon us like this." Then they turned desperate. "Please, we're about to lose the house. Help us one more time, and we'll figure something else out." But I had heard those promises before. For 5 long years. This time, I stayed strong. Then came a call from Amber's sister, a woman I barely knew. "Ruth," she said quietly, "I think you should know. Brandon and Amber are planning to try that Canada trip again. Only this time, without you. They're desperate, and I'm worried they'll do something reckless." My blood ran cold. Even after everything, they were still willing to risk it. "They asked me to watch their son this weekend," she continued, "said they had a business trip. But I think it's something else." I phoned my lawyer immediately. He advised me to contact the authorities, but I couldn't. Not even after what they'd tried to do to me. That Saturday morning, I was sitting in the kitchen with a cup of coffee when the phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. "Is this Ruth Henderson?" A woman's voice asked. "Yes. This is Officer Martinez with U.S. Border Patrol. Your son, Brandon Henderson, and daughter-in-law, Amber Henderson, were arrested early this morning attempting to cross into Canada with illegal substances. They listed you as their emergency contact." My hands shook, though not from surprise. I had known this call was coming. "Their son." I managed to say, "Where is their son?" "He's with a family member for now," the officer replied, "but Child Protective Services will need to arrange placement since you're listed as next of kin." Within hours, I was signing emergency custody papers. That afternoon, my grandson walked into my house carrying a small suitcase and his favorite stuffed animal. He looked scared and confused. "Grandma," he asked that first night as I tucked him into the guest room, "when are Mom and Dad coming back? How do you explain to an 8-year-old that his parents chose reckless paths instead of stability?" "They made some bad choices, sweetheart," I said softly. "But you're safe here with Grandpa and me, and we're going to take very good care of you." In the months that followed, everything unfolded the way I knew it would. Brandon and Amber were each sentenced to 18 months in federal prison. The house they couldn't afford without my help went into foreclosure. Their cars were repossessed. And while I felt no joy in watching their lives collapse, I did feel relief knowing my grandson was safe. The custody hearing was more straightforward than I expected. Facing prison time, Brandon and Amber agreed to sign temporary custody over to me rather than risk their son being placed in foster care. My lawyer helped set up a clear arrangement that protected everyone's interests. My grandson started at a new public school just a few blocks from our house, the same school where I had once worked as a secretary. The teachers remembered me kindly, and they made a special effort to help him adjust. There was no need for an expensive private academy, only caring adults and a steady environment. In the evenings, he sat at my kitchen table doing homework while I made dinner. My husband taught him how to play chess and helped him with math. I read him bedtime stories, just as I had once read to Brandon when he was small. Slowly, the confusion in his eyes began to fade. In its place grew a sense of security he had never truly known before. No more fights about money. No more uncertainty about whether the bills would be paid. No more reckless choices threatening to tear everything apart. One afternoon, About 6 months after he came to live with us, he looked up at me and said, "Grandma, I like it here. It's quiet." That was when I realized what we had all been missing: peace. The kind of simple, ordinary peace that comes from living within your means, making careful choices, and putting a child's well-being first. As for Brandon and Amber, they send occasional letters from prison. Brandon's letters are full of apologies and promises to do better when he gets out. Amber's letters are mostly complaints about prison life and reminders that I somehow owe them for what they're going through. I don't answer either of them. My lawyer has already warned me that once they're released, they will likely try to regain custody of their son. We're preparing for that battle now, documenting everything: the stable home we've provided, the progress my grandson has made in school, the calm routine he now enjoys. For now, our days are filled with school projects, weekend fishing trips with my husband, and quiet evenings reading together on the couch. My grandson is thriving in ways I never saw when he lived under the chaos of his parents' irresponsibility. And me, I've learned something I should have realized long ago. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do is stop enabling bad behavior. Even when it comes from your own child, especially then. I'm 73 now, and I don't know how many more years I'll be given. But I do know this: I will spend whatever time I have raising my grandson to become the kind of man who solves problems honestly, treats people with respect, and never asks someone else to carry the burden of his mistakes. That's my story. It's how a grandmother's instincts and her decision to draw a line saved not only her own life, but also gave her grandson the steady childhood his parents could not provide. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can say to people who take advantage of you isn't, "I'll help you one more time." Sometimes it's, "I love you too much to keep letting you." And sometimes that is exactly what the next generation needs to hear.